My mother-in-law hired a woman to seduce me in the middle of a church party. She wanted to ruin me and take my money. My name is Adrian Parker. I am 46 years old, and not long ago, I learned that the most dangerous poison is always served in a silver cup, and often comes with a blessing attached to it. While everyone at that cursed church party was singing and giving thanks, I watched as my mother-in-law slowly drove a knife into my back with an angelic smile on her face. She didn't want my soul, she wanted my bank account. And to get it, she was willing to use another woman's body as bait. What that woman didn't know, what neither of them suspected while they celebrated my supposed downfall, was that I already knew everything. I sat at that table, sipping a tasteless punch, watching the trap close around me, while keeping the absolute calm of a man who has already buried his enemies before they even realize they're dead. Seeing my mother-in-law lean close and whisper in that young stranger's ear, pointing toward me as if I were an easy target, gave me all the confirmation I needed. In that moment, every last trace of respect or family loyalty died forever. There were no screams, no dramatic scenes, just one cold decision burned into my mind. I was going to take everything from them, every last cent they tried to steal from me, and I would leave them begging for a mercy I no longer had. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how I ended up sitting at that table during the parish party, watching my mother-in-law move her pieces like a grandmaster in a chess match, you first have to understand who I was before money became the scent that attracts hyenas. My life was always built on order, silence, and hard work. I'm the kind of man who prefers to observe before speaking. I work in high-level financial consulting, a world where a single decimal error can destroy an entire company, so precision is my natural language. I was never a man of flashy luxuries. My success showed in the security of my bank account, not in gold watches or sports cars. I was married to Eleanor for 12 years. She was a calm woman, or at least that's what I wanted to believe, but she always had one weakness that eventually became our downfall. Her mother, Beatrice. Beatrice is the kind of woman who uses religion as a shield to hide an ambition that has no bottom. I always saw her as an annoying figure, but manageable. She lived off appearances, off being the main benefactor of the local church, off organizing charity events where what mattered wasn't charity at all, but who donated the most and whose face appeared in the parish bulletin photos. For years I kept a cautious distance. I was the provider son-in-law, the man who paid my mother-in-law's medical bills, the one who financed her spiritual projects, and the one who kept Eleanor inside a bubble of comfort that Beatrice treated as her own right, not as a gesture of my generosity. The balance began to crack when my firm closed a massive international contract. It was one of those deals that changes your life, the kind that moves you into an entirely different level of wealth. I didn't tell anyone outside my immediate professional circle, but during a family dinner, Eleanor, careless in a moment of excitement, mentioned that things were about to change for the better. That was enough. I saw the shine in Beatrice's eyes. It wasn't pride in her son-in-law's success. It was hunger. The look of someone who sees a gold mine and immediately starts calculating how much dynamite it will take to claim it all. From that night on, the atmosphere in my home changed. Eleanor became more reserved, constantly glued to her phone, speaking with her mother. Beatrice, meanwhile, started visiting us with suffocating frequency, always talking about the importance of sharing blessings and how family must remain united in material goods as much as spiritual ones. I am not a paranoid man, but my profession has taught me how to read patterns. I noticed Beatrice beginning to plant doubts in Eleanor's mind about our relationship. Subtle suggestions about my emotional distance, about how a man with that level of success surely had temptations outside the home. It was a calculated plan meant to destabilize our marriage and position herself as the only true ally of her daughter. But what she really wanted was total control. She knew that as long as I remained in charge of the finances, she would only receive crumbs of whatever I chose to give. She needed me to become the villain of the story, the unfaithful husband who loses his rights to his fortune in a scandalous divorce, or at least the vulnerable man who falls into a seduction trap she could use to blackmail me for the rest of my life. The church party was the perfect stage for her, a place where everyone knew me, where my reputation was my most valuable asset. She knew I wouldn't create a scandal there. She knew that in that atmosphere of supposed holiness, I would lower my guard. What Beatrice never understood is that my coldness is not the absence of feeling, it's the presence of control. Weeks before that night, I had already noticed strange movements in my personal accounts, small transfers, documents in my private office at home being moved out of place. Eleanor was completely under her influence, acting like a pawn. The money I had built through decades of sacrifice had become the target of a woman who had never worked a single day in her life and believed that God somehow owed her my fortune. That night I arrived late to the party, tired but fully alert. The air smelled like incense and reheated food. Beatrice greeted me with a hug that felt like the embrace of a constrictor snake. She introduced me to several people from the parish council, all of them smiling with that artificial warmth only those who believe themselves morally superior can maintain. Eleanor was there, but she wouldn't look me in the eyes. She seemed nervous, playing with her wedding ring and avoiding any physical contact with me. And then she appeared, a young woman, beautiful in a bold, almost aggressive way, completely out of place among the conservative ladies of the church committee. Beatrice introduced her as the niece of an old friend who was looking for professional guidance. The lie was so obvious that I almost felt pity for the lack of sophistication in my mother-in-law's plan. But I didn't feel pity. What I felt was a cold spark of fire forming in my stomach. The trap had been set, the bait had been placed, and the audience was ready. All that remained was to see whether I would be the prey or the hunter. The woman introduced herself as Monica. She looked about 25, with flawless skin and a gaze that didn't belong at a church gathering. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, stepped away with a triumphant smile, leaving us alone in a corner of the parish hall under the watchful eyes of the choir ladies who whispered among themselves. Monica wasted no time. She began talking about supposed investment projects, brushing my arm accidentally every time she emphasized a word. Her perfume was expensive, far too strong for a place where humility was supposed to reign. I remained still, observing how Beatrice, from the main table, gave her a nearly imperceptible signal with her head. It was a rehearsed choreography. That night, while Monica pretended to be interested in my financial advice, my wife Eleanor approached. I expected a jealous scene, a protective reaction, but what I saw in her eyes was something much worse: indifference mixed with fear. Eleanor wasn't jealous. She was waiting for me to bite the bait. She excused herself, saying she needed to help her mother with the donations, and left me there, at the mercy of a woman who clearly charged by the hour to destroy marriages. In that moment, reality hit me with the cold force of a block of ice. My wife, the woman I had shared 12 years of my life with, was an accomplice in her mother's plan to fabricate an infidelity, record me or expose me, and strip me of everything in a divorce based on moral misconduct in the eyes of their community. Beatrice's plan was crude, but effective for her world of appearances. They wanted me to leave the hall with Monica, to take that woman somewhere private. The witnesses were already prepared, maybe even a photographer hidden among the bushes in the parish garden. What they wanted was my signature on a separation agreement where, out of shame for being exposed inside their precious church, I would surrender half of my assets and a lifelong payment that would finance my mother-in-law's delusions of grandeur for the rest of her life. My money wasn't meant for charity. It was meant to keep Beatrice crowned as the queen of a kingdom made of cardboard. I felt a deep wave of nausea, but I didn't move a single muscle in my face. I looked Monica straight in the eyes as she suggested that the air in the hall felt too heavy and that we should go outside for a walk. I smiled at her, a smile she interpreted as weakness, but which was actually the beginning of her end. "Wait here a moment," I told her in a cold whisper. I walked toward the dessert table where Beatrice ruled over her little circle of followers. As I approached, I noticed my personal briefcase beside her, the one I usually leave in the car, but that night Eleanor insisted we bring inside, for safety. I saw that the digital lock had been forced. They had been searching for my access codes, my banking tokens, anything that would allow them to empty my accounts before I could react. The humiliation wasn't public. It was internal. Watching those two women whose lives I had financed with a lifestyle they had never even dreamed of, dig through my belongings like alley thieves, broke something inside me. Beatrice looked at me and, with a cynicism that froze my blood, asked, "Are you enjoying yourself with my friend's niece, Adrian? She's a charming girl, isn't she?" Eleanor stood beside her, nodding with her head lowered, without the courage to look me in the eyes. In that moment, I understood that I no longer had a wife or an extended family. I had parasites that had infiltrated my system and were trying to devour me alive. The betrayal reached its peak when, as I walked back toward where Monica was waiting, I overheard part of her phone conversation behind a column. "Yes, I almost have him. He's a cold guy, but he'll fall. The old lady says that once he signs the paper about the supposed affair, we split the commission." The old lady was my mother-in-law. My life, my years of effort, was being auctioned off between a con artist and a woman who beat her chest in the front row every Sunday at church. That same night when we arrived home, the silence was absolute. Eleanor locked herself in the guest bedroom, claiming she had a headache. There was no goodnight kiss, no question about how I felt. I went to my office, locked the door, and sat there in the dark. I turned on my computer and saw notifications of failed login attempts on my main accounts. They had tried to access them from Eleanor's iPad 3 times while I was still at the party. They had declared me dead too soon. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed sitting there, watching the sunrise, processing the fact that my home had become enemy territory. No one physically threw me out, but emotionally I was already gone from that house. I felt like a stranger in my own life, surrounded by traitors who were only waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated my ability to analyze and my complete lack of mercy when I feel cornered. The war had begun, and they still believed I was the prey. The next morning, I didn't wake up angry. I woke up with a cold, surgical clarity. I showered, dressed with the precision of a soldier, and went downstairs for breakfast. Eleanor avoided my eyes, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. I said nothing. There were no accusations, no questions. I knew that any word from me would immediately be reported to Beatrice. My silence was my best weapon. I left the house and, instead of going to my usual office, drove to a discreet building in the financial district. There, Julian Carter was waiting for me, a lawyer who doesn't handle ordinary divorces, but the protection of high-risk assets. He isn't a man of spiritual laws, but of mathematical outcomes. I laid the facts on the table. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for strategy. Julian listened in silence, reviewing the evidence of the login attempts to my accounts that I had already traced through my private server. "They want to kill you civilly, Adrian," he said in a voice completely devoid of emotion. "They want your money and your reputation so you can't defend yourself. If you strike now with a standard divorce, Beatrice will use her influence in the church to paint you as the devil, and Eleanor will walk away with half of everything by law. We have to be smarter." The plan wasn't to escape. The plan was to let them believe they were winning while I quietly removed the ground beneath their feet. For the next 3 weeks, I played the role of the perfect husband and the obedient son-in-law. I attended dinners at Beatrice's house, accepted her hypocritical advice about opening my heart to new friendships, and continued exchanging messages with Monica, the woman she had hired. Every message from Monica, every suggestion that we meet alone, was captured and stored on a secure server. I responded with calculated ambiguity, just enough to keep her interested, but never enough to legally compromise myself. Meanwhile, I began reconstructing my financial reality. I moved capital legally but strategically into investment funds Eleanor couldn't touch, shell companies that I controlled but that did not appear under my personal name. I was turning my fortune into a ghost, something they could still see on old paperwork, but that no longer truly existed. I hired a private investigator, a man who asks no questions, to follow Beatrice. I wanted to know where the money I gave her for her so-called charitable work was really going. What he discovered became the fuel for my counterattack. My mother-in-law wasn't donating everything to the poor. A large portion of those funds was being used to pay gambling debts for a secret son she kept hidden in another city, and to finance a lifestyle that far exceeded her supposed income. Beatrice wasn't just manipulative, she was embezzling funds from the very church she claimed to love. I had the receipts, the photographs, and testimony from the places her son frequented. I had the rope. All that remained was for her to tie the knot herself. My patience was absolute. Every time I sat at dinner across from Eleanor, pretending everything was normal while she plotted my downfall with her mother, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction. They believed I was the useful fool, the walking ATM who would soon hand them the keys to the kingdom. Eleanor even began pressuring me to place our main house in her name under the excuse of family asset protection. Beatrice, for her part, suggested I make a massive donation to the parish to fund a new wing of the hospital, one that she herself would manage. I agreed to everything. I let them believe the paperwork was already underway. I handed them fake documents, draft contracts with no legal value but impressive-looking notary seals that I had personally commissioned. The master detail was the second trap. I made Monica believe I was ready to leave everything behind for her. I told her we should meet in a private place to sign a document that would secure our future. Hungry for her commission, she agreed immediately. What she didn't know was that I had already traced her previous payments. I knew exactly how much Beatrice had paid her, and from which hidden parish account the money had been withdrawn. The preparation was complete. I had the betrayal documented, my mother-in-law's embezzlement confirmed, and my wife's complicity recorded in conversations she believed were private. Revenge is not a dish served cold. It's a dish served when the enemy is at their hungriest. So I waited for the next major church event, the annual fundraising gala where Beatrice would be the star. I let her feel powerful. I watched her dress in her finest clothes, all bought with my money. I saw her walking through the hall as if she owned the world, with Eleanor beside her, both smiling with the confidence of women who believed they had already won the war. I stood quietly in a corner, my phone in my hand, waiting for the exact moment to release the first domino. I felt no nerves, only the calm certainty of a man who knows that justice, when planned by someone who has already lost everything, is flawless. The night of the annual gala was the stage Beatrice had built for her own coronation. Without realizing, I had dug her grave right beneath the podium. The hall was packed with influential people, all dressed in their finest suits and gowns, celebrating my mother-in-law's supposed generosity. She looked radiant, holding a glass of wine, moving among the guests with that false humility that always made me sick. Eleanor walked beside her, playing the role of the perfect daughter, though her eyes kept searching the room for Monica, who stood at the back of the hall waiting for the signal to approach me and seal my public downfall. I walked over to the control table for the giant screen where photos of the parish's supposed charity projects were being displayed. The technician, a young man I paid well enough to take a very long coffee break, left me with full access. I inserted my USB drive. It didn't contain pictures of smiling children or renovated churches. It contained the truth. While the priest stepped up to the podium to thank, Our great benefactor, Mrs. Beatrice. I calmly returned to my seat directly across from her. I held her gaze and raised my glass in a silent toast. She smiled back at me with pure contempt, convinced I was the fool who was about to lose everything. Suddenly the music stopped and the lights dimmed for the main video presentation. But instead of the usual montage, screenshots of text messages between Beatrice and Monica appeared on the giant screen. The silence in the room became so heavy you could hear the low hum of the projector.
Make sure Adrian signs the infidelity document before he realizes we emptied the parish account to pay your brother, one of Beatrice's messages read. Then came the photographs. Beatrice's secret son inside an underground casino, spending money that faithful church members had donated for the hospital project. And finally, the audio. A clear recording of Beatrice and Eleanor in my kitchen, calmly discussing how they would slightly drug me that same night so Monica could take compromising photos of us together in a hotel bed. Beatrice's face shifted from triumph to horror in less than 3 seconds. She turned pale, a grey shade I will never forget. Eleanor covered her mouth with both hands, looking around as the whispers of the guests quickly grew into a roar of outrage. The priest, an older man who truly believed in his mission, froze behind the microphone, staring at the screen with deep disappointment. I stood from my seat with a calmness that surprised even me. I walked slowly toward the stage, stepping around guests who moved aside as if I were a ghost. I stopped directly in front of Beatrice. She tried to speak, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. I handed her a brown envelope. It wasn't a standard divorce filing. It was a notification stating that all the accounts she believed she shared with my wife had been frozen under a forensic audit I personally initiated that morning. It also included proof that the house she lived in, the one she swore she owned through inheritance, was actually registered under one of my holding companies, and that eviction proceedings would begin within 24 hours due to non-payment. Charity begins at home, Beatrice. I whispered quietly enough that only she and Eleanor could hear. And you don't have a home anymore. Eleanor grabbed my arm. Tears finally real this time, born from the panic of losing her lifestyle. I removed her hand with a sharp but controlled gesture. There was nothing left to say. Behind us, the evidence continued playing on the screen. Bank transfers, hotel records, escort service contracts paid with church funds. When Monica realized the plan had collapsed, she tried to slip out through a side door. But the police, whom I had alerted earlier about a possible fraud and misuse of public charitable funds, were already waiting outside. Watching my mother-in-law fall to her knees in the middle of the hall, not to pray, but under the crushing weight of her exposed malice, became the clearest moment of my life. The same churchgoers who had praised her an hour earlier now looked at her with disgust. Some even shouted at her. Justice wasn't a lightning bolt from heaven. It was a clockwork mechanism I built, piece by piece. I left the hall without looking back. I heard Eleanor shouting my name, but her cries weren't about love. They were about financial desperation. As I walked toward my car, the air felt cleaner. There was no explosive joy, no laughter, only the quiet satisfaction of a job executed perfectly. I had protected my fortune. I had exposed the hyenas, and I had taken from them the only things they truly loved, their reputation and my money. The night was calm, and for the first time in months, I no longer felt the weight of betrayal behind my back. The predator had tried to bite, but it ended up breaking its teeth against the wall I built myself. The dust has finally settled, and the silence that remains is, at last, a peaceful silence. The consequences of that night at the church were devastating for them, exactly as I planned. Beatrice didn't just lose her status. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation into the diversion of parish funds. Her friends, the same ones who shared wine and smiles with her during the gala, turned their backs on her before the week was over. No one wants to stand close to a saint who has been exposed as a fraud.
She ended up living in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the luxuries I once financed, spending what little money she had left on lawyers who can't save her from the digital evidence I handed over.
Eleanor tried to contact me for months.
She sent emails filled with guilt that smelled more like desperation than remorse, claiming she had been manipulated by her mother, that she was another victim in the whole scheme. I never answered a single one of them. During the divorce proceedings, my legal team was relentless. Thanks to the proof of conspiracy and fraud, the judge ruled in my favor in a way that rarely happens. She walked away from our marriage with the bare minimum, exactly how she had planned to leave me. Sometimes I wonder if, when she looks at herself in the mirror, she still sees the woman I once loved, or if all she sees now is the reflection of her mother's ambition. But that question no longer keeps me awake at night.
What I learned from all of this is that loyalty cannot be bought, but betrayal always has a price, and the traitor eventually pays it with interest. Many men in my position would have screamed, cried, or collapsed in desperation. I chose coldness instead. I understood that emotional intelligence is the difference between being a victim and being the architect of your own reality. My life now is different. I still work, I still analyze numbers, but I do it with the certainty that no one sleeps under my roof with a knife hidden beneath their pillow. There is no forgiveness in this story, because forgiveness requires genuine repentance, and they are only sorry they were caught. My greatest victory wasn't watching them fall. It was realizing that my worth never depended on their approval or their supposed holiness. Money comes and goes, but dignity, once you reclaim it with an iron hand, has no price. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply watching life collect the debts it is owed.
If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.